Wilson, thank you so much for your time for this interview with KRFP.
Happy to do it.
You've been credited with giving the name Intoleristas to a group of Moscow citizens back in 2005, and that was 10 years ago.
Okay.
And 10 years later, they are still having an annual Intolerista Wingding celebration.
I've seen this banner. Yes.
You've seen the banner. So tell me why you felt that a large group of citizens who were responding to a publication back in 2003 about slavery that you had published and had spoken about in our community, why did you feel that these people who were responding to you were intolerant?
The reason is that that's not what they were responding to. So I wrote the booklet, co-wrote the booklet in the mid-90s. So it was an old booklet, old news. It was not a thing. And what happened was some of our students, some of the students here, had begun to reach out to some members of the Gay Straight Alliance up at the U of I, and had gone to some of the meetings to make friends with people and to talk. They weren't picketing or protesting or nothing like that. It was they were reaching out. And
this was around 2003?
Well, the ruckus, the big ruckus was 2002, 2003. Yes. So this happened. So they were doing this, and the Gay Straight Alliance was divided. Some of them were happy to get to know some conservative Christians and talk and everything, and the other half were mad, just mad about it. And so the folks who were mad about it, we had a history. At that time we had an annual history conference, and we had a history conference coming up that was on the revolutionary era. The age of revolutions, French Revolution, all of that. And one morning, all of Moscow was papered with posters about our upcoming history conference on slavery. Well, it wasn't on slavery at all. It had nothing to do with slavery. And what they did is they'd gone back to this booklet that I'd co-written with Steve Wilkins, took some quotes out of context, put them on the poster, and then wallpapered downtown with the poster about our conference on slavery. Well, and then that's what started the food fight. That was the ruckus, and it was the result of some of our people reaching out and trying to make friends. So that's and so in this, let me get to the name Intolerista. What I did is I said there are people in our town whose absolute value is tolerance, and they need to start showing some. They are tolerant of everything that thinks like they do. They don't know how to tolerate anything to the right of them that disagrees. Right. So I called them Intoleristas somewhere in that ruckus, and the name stuck.
It certainly has.
Yes.
In a tongue-in-cheek sort of way.
Right. I understand. They're using it very, very differently than I do. Right. But it's the same word.
Why do you think they would be intolerant of you as a religious leader?
Because of what they think, what they're afraid I would do, or what they're afraid I'm up to.
What are they afraid of?
They're afraid that we're Reformed Calvinist Ayatollahs that are trying to take over the town and make all the women wear veils, something like that. So they're afraid of things that I don't believe, don't want to do, don't want to practice. But we are conservative Christians. That's true, and there's a lot of us. And so what happened was Moscow was a blue dot in a very red state.
Indeed,
Does that make sense? It is.
Yes.
So, and as a university community, it sort of took a quiet pride in being Berkeley of the North, or some sort of a blue dot of sanity in this red state insanity. And what happened was, as our churches here started to grow and have grown significantly, and we're now a significant part of the whole population, I believe that the progressives, the liberals, and the Intoloristas, being the radical wing of liberals and progressives, I believe that they felt their identity as a quiet liberal town threatened, and so they reacted to this presence among them. And unfortunately, they reacted. If we were Muslims, they would have been a whole lot nicer to us. If we were Jews, they'd be a whole lot nicer to us. If we were Amish, they'd love us and buy our quilts. But we're conservative, evangelical, Reformed Christians, so they despise us.
So I refer to it as a conflict, and you refer to it as a ruckus. Mm-hmm. And it certainly has become a significant part of our recent Moscow community history.
Correct.
It has established itself as history at this point.
Yeah.
And it certainly has caused some serious factioning among members of our community.
That's true too.
And how has that factioning affected members of your congregation?
Well, most of our folks are used to it. Some of our people are kind of oblivious, and they're not aware of it until they run into it. The recent thing with the co-op would be an example where a number of our members of our church are members of the co-op, and a couple of them got elected to the co-op board just as part of the normal process. It's a small town and people are involved, and I would run into people from our church at Les Schwab, and it's no surprise that they're over the co-op too. And so there was just within the last month, a controversy at the co-op, and at least one of our members who was elected to the board was just totally surprised at they were out of that loop, and then until they ran into the buzzsaw.
You are listening to an interview with Christ Church pastor Doug Wilson, recorded at his office in Moscow this morning. Wilson spoke with KRFP citizen journalist Maree McHugh.
In 2013, the city of Moscow adopted an anti-discrimination ordinance making it illegal to discriminate against people based on gender identity and sexual orientation. So would you include the city leaders as Intoloristas?
I would say that sometimes politicians pass laws without having a clue what they're doing. They're just responding to pressure, right? Mm-hmm. So I would distinguish between people who want that law, who argue for it, who insist on it, and politicians who go along, right? But I would say that law is very much an Intolerista law. And
what are they intolerant of? If it becomes inclusive and prevents people who might be outside of the bell curve from being discriminated against?
Right. I would say everything hinges on. It's one of these inescapable concepts. It's not whether you discriminate, it's who you discriminate against. So we either discriminate against, let's say, the sexual outliers, the people outside the bell curve, as you described them, or we discriminate against evangelical florists, right? So if, let's say I'm a Christian, conservative Christian, and I own a hardware store, and a gay man comes in and wants to buy a hammer. I'll sell him a hammer. I'll sell him 2 hammers. I have no problem doing business in a community with practicing homosexuals, open homosexuals. I have no problem selling him a hammer.
But what if he were to come into want to join your congregation?
Congregation is a voluntary association of people who submit to a particular doctrinal understanding of the world, right? So I can't. It would be like me going to join the chess club at the U of I and bringing my backgammon board. I'm sorry, the chess club exists to promote the playing of chess. Mm-hmm. I don't get to take it over and make everybody play backgammon or make them call my backgammon playing chess. All right, so as a church is a voluntary association. Well, let's take it into the public square. Let's say I'm a photographer, a videographer, or a florist, or a baker, like the Christian bakery in Oregon, or Darnell Stutzman in Washington. When someone comes to a baker or comes to a florist, they're saying, we are having this event that your religion describes as sinful, And we want you to take your expertise in glorifying, beautifying, praising something, and we want you to come, and we want to force you by force of law to come and praise something that you don't want to praise, that you don't agree with. All right? It would be like a KKK grand wizard coming into a black baker's bakery saying, hey, we're having our 150th anniversary.
Would you cater it?
Would you cater it?
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And I'd say, well, come on, for crying out loud. Let the baker say no thanks. Right? And if you say no, it's the baker put his shingle out and he's promising the public what these people are doing is not illegal. The KKK reception there's no illegal activity. What you're doing is we're either going to discriminate against the KKK guy, or we're going to discriminate against the black baker. But we're going to discriminate against somebody. Now, what I'm saying is that the recent statute that Moscow passed has come down firmly saying we are going to discriminate against conservative Christians. Sorry. We don't care what you think. We don't care what your religion says. We don't.
I don't think the ordinance stated that.
Well, it basically could a florist or photographer get in trouble with the ordinance by declining to cater an event or photograph an event because it was a same-sex event? The answer is yes. Right? The answer is yes. And so consequently, we are being discriminated against. But that's not the objection. Somebody is always going to be discriminated against. What I want to do is maximize the amount of liberty and minimize the amount of giving offense to one another. So I want the black baker to have every liberty to decline to do the KKK event. I want our florists to have the right to decline to do a gay event. And I want the gay florist to have the right to decline to do our church dinner. Right?
Are you able to speak about what specifically about homosexuality you are against?
Oh, okay. Basically, I'm a Christian who believes the Bible, and I believe the Bible teaches that homosexual behavior is not God's pattern, not God's design. Because in the first chapter of Genesis, God created male and female, and it says He created them in the image of God. In the image of God created He them, male and female created He them. So
as stated in the Bible.
As stated in the Bible. So I believe that mankind together, male and female together, is what bears and carries the image of God. And so consequently, to rearrange it, I think, is to say, well, why not 2 women or 2 men or a man and 3 women? Or I believe you're blurring the message that God has embedded into the world of His own image. God.
So based on the information and interpretation of the Bible as you see it,
correct.
That is your premise.
That's my premise, and I believe in a country with religious liberty. I ought to be allowed to believe that. I ought to be allowed to say that, and I ought to be allowed to live my life in accordance with it. And I would be willing to grant that same right to someone else.
That was KRFP correspondent Maree McHugh interviewing Christ Church pastor Doug Wilson at his office today in Moscow. Earlier in the broadcast, you heard from Jeannie McHugh, one of the artists performing music at the Intolerista Wingding event June 13th at the